Hello and welcome to The Drowsy Architect. This is a channel where we tell the stories of the world's greatest buildings, slowly, gently, as bedtime stories for grown-ups. The narration is calm, the music is soft, and if you fall asleep before the end, that is exactly what we're here for. Tonight, we visit the Eiffel Tower, a structure built for 20 years that refused to disappear, hated by artists, saved by radio waves, and now the most visited paid monument on Earth. Now settle in and let us begin. If you were to stand on the banks of the Seine on a clear night in Paris and look westward along the river, past the stone bridges with their golden lamps reflected in the dark water, past the shuttered bookstalls and the quiet quays, you would see it. Rising from the flat green lawns of the Champ de Mars, an enormous lattice of iron, climbing higher and higher into the sky until it seems to pierce the very darkness above it. 330 meters of riveted metal, tapering from broad, arching legs to a slender point crowned with light. At night, it glows. 20,000 light bulbs trace its silhouette against the Paris sky, and every hour on the hour, it sparkles. A cascade of twinkling lights runs from top to bottom. And for 5 minutes, the tower shimmers like something from a dream. The Eiffel Tower. You know it, of course. Everyone knows it. It is perhaps the most recognizable structure on Earth. It appears on postcards and keychains and snow globes and 1,000 other souvenirs sold in 1,000 shops within walking distance of its base. It has been painted by artists and photographed by tourists and climbed by millions of people from every country in the world. It is the symbol of Paris, the symbol of France, one of those rare buildings that has transcended architecture entirely and become something more like an idea. But tonight, we are not interested in the idea. We are interested in the story, the real story, the one that most people have never heard. Because the Eiffel Tower, this beloved, iconic, seemingly permanent fixture of the Paris skyline, was never meant to last. It was built as a temporary structure, a 20-year experiment, and for most of its construction, it was hated, genuinely, furiously, publicly hated by some of the most celebrated artists and writers in France. They called it a disgrace, a monstrosity, a metal asparagus. They signed petitions demanding it be torn down. They wrote newspaper columns predicting it would be the ruin of Paris. And when its 20-year permit expired, the French government fully intended to dismantle it, bolt by bolt, rivet by rivet, until nothing remained but the 4 concrete foundations sunk into the soil of the Champ de Mars. It survived, but only barely, and the reason it survived is one of the most improbable stories in the history of architecture. So settle in, let the day fall behind you. The lights of Paris are glittering on the water tonight, and the tower, that impossible, improbable, magnificent tower, is waiting for us to tell its story. Our story begins not with the tower, but with a man. Alexander Gustave Eiffel was born on the 15th of December, 1832, in the city of Dijon, in the Burgundy region of eastern France. His family was comfortable but not wealthy. His father, Alexander Bonnecorson dit Eiffel, was a former soldier who had become an administrator in the French army. His mother, Catherine Melanie Monius, came from a family that had made its money in the charcoal trade and later in timber and coal distribution. The family name, Bonnecorson dit Eiffel, deserves a brief note. The dit Eiffel was a name adopted by the family several generations earlier, a reference to the Eiffel region of Germany from which Gustave's ancestors had emigrated to France in the early 18th century. Gustave would later drop the Bonnekhorsen entirely and use only the name Eiffel. It was simpler, more French, and it would become, in time, one of the most famous names in the world. Young Gustave was not a particularly remarkable student in his early years. His mother ran the household with considerable energy, managing the coal business and raising the children while his father worked. Gustave was sent to the Lycée Royal in Dijon and later to the Collège Sainte-Barbe in Paris, where he prepared for the entrance examinations to the École Polytechnique, the most prestigious engineering school in France. He did not get in. This was a setback, but not a catastrophe. Instead, Gustave entered the École Centrale des Arts et Manufactures, another excellent engineering school, and there he found his calling. He graduated in 1855, near the top of his class, with a specialization in chemistry, but it was not chemistry that would define his career, it was iron. In 1862, at the age of 29, Gustave married Marie Gordelet. She was the daughter of a wealthy brewer from Dijon, and the marriage brought both happiness and financial security. They had 5 children together, 3 daughters and 2 sons. By all accounts, it was a loving partnership. Gustave and Marie settled into the comfortable life of the Parisian bourgeoisie, with a house in the city and a country property in Burgundy. But Marie's health was fragile. She suffered from what was described at the time as a weakness of the lungs, possibly tuberculosis, the disease that haunted 19th century Europe like a shadow. She grew increasingly frail through the 1870s, and on the 8th of September, 1877, she died. She was 32 years old. Eiffel was devastated. He was 44. He had 5 children, the youngest barely more than an infant, and he was in the midst of the most productive period of his career. He threw himself into his work with a ferocity that his colleagues noted and worried about. He traveled constantly, overseeing projects across Europe and beyond. His eldest daughter, Claire, took on much of the responsibility of raising her younger siblings. Eiffel never remarried for the rest of his long life. He would be married to his work, to iron, to the bridges and viaducts and structures that stretched outward from his workshops like a web of iron across the world. The mid-19th century was the age of iron. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the material from a craft product, hammered by blacksmiths in village forges, into an industrial commodity produced in vast quantities in the blast furnaces of Britain and France and Belgium. Iron rails carried the new railways. Iron beams held up the new factories. Iron bridges spanned the rivers that had once been crossed only by stone or timber. And France, in the 1850s, was building railways at a feverish pace. The Second Empire of Napoleon III, who had seized power in a coup in 1851, was pouring money into modernization. New boulevards were being cut through the medieval streets of Paris under the direction of Baron Haussmann. New railway stations were rising in every major city. New bridges were needed to carry the tracks across rivers and valleys and gorges. This was the world that the young Gustave Eiffel entered when he graduated from engineering school. And he entered it with a gift that would serve him well throughout his career, a gift for understanding iron, not just as a material, but as a structural system. He understood how iron behaved under load, how it flexed, how it carried weight, how it could be shaped and joined and braced to create structures of extraordinary strength and lightness. His first major project came in 1858, when he was just 26 years old. He was hired to oversee the construction of an iron railway bridge across the Garonne River at Bordeaux. It was a significant commission. The bridge was over 500 meters long, with 6 spans supported on iron piers sunk into the riverbed using a technique called pneumatic caissons, pressurized chambers that allowed workers to excavate the riverbed below the waterline. The Bordeaux Bridge was a success. It established Eiffel's reputation as a man who could solve difficult engineering problems with elegance and efficiency, and it set the pattern for his career. Over the next 3 decades, Gustave Eiffel would become the most prolific bridge builder in France, and perhaps in the world. The bridges came one after another, dozens of them, then hundreds. Eiffel established his own company in 1866, Compagnie des Établissements Eiffel, with workshops at Levallois-Perret, a suburb just northwest of Paris. From these workshops, a steady stream of iron structures flowed outward across France and then across the world. He built railway bridges in Portugal, viaducts in the mountains of central France, bridges in Vietnam and Peru and Bolivia and Egypt. His company designed and fabricated the iron framework for the Statue of Liberty, the internal skeleton that gives the copper skin its shape, a gift from France to the United States that was assembled in New York Harbor in 1886. If you have ever climbed the stairs inside the Statue of Liberty, you have walked through an Eiffel structure. But the project that made his name, the one that earned him the informal title, the Magician of Iron, was the Garabit Viaduct. Built between 1880 and 1884, in the rugged volcanic landscape of the Massif Central, the Garabit Viaduct carries a railway line across the valley of the Trier River. The central arch spans 165 meters, and at its highest point, the track runs 122 meters above the valley floor. When it was completed, it was the highest bridge in the world. The Garabit Viaduct is a thing of austere beauty. Its lattice ironwork traces a parabolic curve across the valley, each member precisely calculated to carry its share of the load. There is nothing decorative about it, no ornament, no flourish. Every piece of iron is there because the mathematics says it must be, and yet the result is graceful. The arch seems to float across the valley, as if the iron has been persuaded to defy gravity itself. Eiffel understood something that many architects of his time did not. He understood that when you design a structure honestly, when every element serves a purpose and nothing is wasted, the result is not ugly, it is beautiful. The beauty of pure engineering, the beauty of forces made visible in iron. This understanding would define the tower. But before we come to the tower, let us look at the city where it would stand. Paris in the 1880s was a city in transformation. The brutal renovations of Baron Haussmann, carried out under Napoleon III in the 1850s and 60s, had ripped through the medieval fabric of the old city and replaced it with the broad, tree-lined boulevards and uniform stone facades that we know today. The grand avenues radiated outward from central nodes. The Place de l'Étoile, the Place de la République, the Place de la Bastille. The new buildings were faced with pale limestone, 5 or 6 stories high, with iron balconies and zinc mansard roofs. Paris had been remade in stone and iron and glass as the most beautiful city in the world. But it was also a city haunted by recent trauma. In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War had ended in catastrophic French defeat. Napoleon III was captured at Sedan. The Prussian army besieged Paris for 4 months. Parisians ate rats and horses and the animals from the zoo. The elephant from the Jardin des Plantes was butchered and sold at premium prices. When the siege finally ended, France had lost the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine, and had been forced to pay an enormous indemnity. Then came the Commune. In March of 1871, the people of Paris rose in revolt against the new French government. For 2 months, the Communards controlled the city. When the French army retook Paris in May, the fighting was savage. The Communards set fire to the Tuileries Palace, to the Hôtel de Ville, to parts of the Louvre. The army executed thousands of Communards in reprisal. The streets ran with blood. By some estimates, 20,000 Parisians died in a single week. This was the Paris that Gustave Eiffel knew, a city that had been besieged, burned, and rebuilt, a city that was desperate to prove to the world and to itself that it had recovered, that it was still great, that it was still the capital of civilization. The Universal Expositions were part of this recovery, and the planned Exposition of 1889 would be the greatest of them all. Now, to understand why the Eiffel Tower was built, we need to understand the Universal Expositions themselves, and to understand Paris in the 1880s, we need to understand the Universal Expositions. The great international exhibitions of the 19th century were extraordinary events, part trade fair, part cultural festival, part exercise in national prestige. They brought together the latest technologies and artistic achievements from around the world, displayed in purpose-built pavilions and halls that were themselves marvels of engineering. The first great exhibition was the Great Exhibition of 1851, held in London in Joseph Paxton's Crystal Palace, an enormous structure of glass and iron that covered 19 acres of Hyde Park. It was a sensation. 6 million visitors came to marvel at the steam engines and the power looms and the electric telegraphs and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. Queen Victoria visited 33 times. France had responded with its own exhibitions in 1855 and 1867, both held in Paris. Napoleon III used them to showcase French industry and culture, and to demonstrate that Paris was the equal of London as a world capital. After the disasters of the Franco-Prussian War and the Paris Commune in 1870 and 71, exhibitions in 1878 had helped restore French confidence and rebuild the city's international reputation. Now, in the early 1880s, France was planning its most ambitious exhibition yet, the Exposition Universelle of 1889, and the date was significant. 1889 was the centennial of the French Revolution, the 100th anniversary of the storming of the Bastille, of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, of the birth of the French Republic. The exhibition would be a celebration of everything France had achieved in those 100 years: industry, science, art, democracy, progress, and at its center, there would be a monument, a centerpiece so dramatic, so unprecedented, so impossible to ignore, that the whole world would look at France and marvel. The government announced a competition: design a tower, an iron tower, 300 meters tall, the tallest structure ever built by human hands. The site chosen for the tower was the Champ de Mars. This was not an arbitrary choice. The Champ de Mars has a long history. Its name means Field of Mars, after the Roman god of war. It had been a military parade ground since the 18th century, a broad, flat expanse of land stretching from the Seine to the École Militaire. It was here that the great festivals of the French Revolution had been held. In 1790, the first anniversary of the storming of the Bastille was celebrated here with a festival of the Federation, attended by hundreds of thousands of Parisians. King Louis XVI was present, though he would be dead within 3 years. The Champ de Mars had also hosted the Universal Expositions of 1867 and 1878. Its flat terrain, its proximity to the river, and its ample space made it the natural venue for large-scale events. And it was here, on this historic ground, that the tallest structure ever conceived would rise. But first, there was the matter of the competition. And the competition was not simply about engineering, it was about national pride. France in the 1880s was a republic surrounded by monarchies. Germany, France's great rival, was ruled by the Kaiser. Britain had Queen Victoria. Russia had the Tsar. Austria-Hungary had the Emperor. France alone, among the great powers of Europe, was governed by elected representatives. The centennial of the Revolution was an opportunity to demonstrate that the republican system worked, that democracy could produce greatness, that a nation governed by the people, for the people, could build something that would make the world stare in wonder. The tower was not just a tower, it was a political statement, an assertion of republican values, a declaration that France, democratic, modern, forward-looking France, was the equal of any monarchy on earth. 300 meters. Let us pause for a moment and consider what that means in 1884, when the competition was announced. The tallest structure in the world at that time was the Washington Monument in the United States, an obelisk of marble and granite that had been completed just that year. It stood 169 meters tall. The great cathedrals of Europe, which had held the height record for centuries, topped out at around 160 meters. Cologne Cathedral, completed in 1880, reached 157 meters. The Great Pyramid of Giza, which had been the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years, stood 146 meters. 300 meters was not simply tall, it was nearly double the height of anything that had ever been built. It was an engineering challenge of an entirely different order. Many engineers believed it was impossible, that a structure of that height would collapse under its own weight, that the wind loads at 300 meters would tear it apart, that no foundation could support such a mass, that it was, quite simply, madness. Over 100 proposals were submitted to the competition. Some were practical, some were fantastical. One proposed a giant guillotine, which seems a questionable way to celebrate the revolution. Another suggested an enormous watering can. A third proposed a lighthouse that would illuminate all of Paris. The winning design was submitted on the 6th of June, 1884, by Gustave Eiffel and his company, but it is important to note that the design was not entirely Eiffel's own work. The original concept had been developed by two of his senior engineers, Maurice Koechlin and Émile Naugaer, with architectural embellishments by Stephen Sylvester. Koechlin and Naugaer had sketched the first design in June of 1884, a simple pylon of 4 lattice girders spreading apart at the base and tapering to a point at the top. Eiffel had been unimpressed at first. He thought it was too plain, too naked. He suggested they bring in Sylvester, the head of the company's architectural department, to add decorative elements. Sylvester added the arches at the base, the glass pavilion on the first floor, and the cupola at the summit. Eiffel then bought the patent rights from Koechlin and Naugaer and submitted the design under his own name. This has been a source of some controversy. Koechlin and Naugaer were the true originators of the design, but Eiffel was the impresario, the businessman, the man who would raise the money, manage the construction, and put his name and his reputation on the line. Without Eiffel, the tower would have remained a sketch on an engineer's drawing table. The government approved the design in January of 1887. Eiffel signed a contract with the city of Paris and the French state. The terms were generous, but contained a significant condition. Eiffel would receive a government subsidy of 1.5 million francs, roughly 20% of the estimated construction cost of 7.5 million francs. He would have to raise the rest himself. In return, he would receive all revenue from the tower during the exhibition and for 20 years afterward. At the end of those 20 years, the tower would become the property of the city of Paris. And the city could do whatever it wanted with it, including tear it down. Let us pause here to consider the mathematics of the tower, because the shape of the Eiffel Tower, that elegant, tapering curve, is not an aesthetic choice. It is a mathematical necessity. The greatest challenge facing a tower 300 meters tall is not gravity, it is wind. The weight of the iron can be calculated and supported with relative ease, but the wind, the invisible, unpredictable, constantly shifting force of moving air, is another matter entirely. At 300 meters, the wind exerts enormous pressure on the structure. A strong gust could generate forces of several hundred tons, enough to topple any conventional building. Eiffel's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. He designed the tower so that its profile, its silhouette viewed from the side, followed an exponential curve. This curve was not chosen for its appearance. It was calculated to ensure that at every point along the tower's height, the force of the wind on the structure above was perfectly balanced by the strength of the structure below. The tower is wider at the base, where it must resist the greatest forces, and narrower at the top, where the forces are smaller. Every cross-section of the tower is exactly as strong as it needs to be to resist the wind at that height. Nothing more, nothing less. This is why the tower has its distinctive shape. The curve is not arbitrary, it is the curve of resistance, the mathematical expression of a structure in perfect equilibrium with the forces that would destroy it. Eiffel's engineers calculated the wind loads with extraordinary precision. They used the data from Eiffel's own experiments on air resistance, conducted by dropping objects from his bridges and measuring their trajectories. They modeled the behavior of the structure under different wind conditions. They calculated the stresses in every member, every joint, every connection. The result is a structure that is simultaneously massive and light. 7,300 tons of iron sounds like an enormous quantity, but if you were to melt the tower down and pour the molten iron into a square mold the same size as its base, 125 meters on a side, the resulting slab would be only 6 centimeters thick. The tower is not a solid mass. It is a lattice, an open framework of iron that offers remarkably little resistance to the wind. The air passes through it. This was the key insight, not to fight the wind, but to let it pass. Eiffel also incorporated a system of hydraulic jacks at the base of each leg. These jacks, 16 in total, could be used to adjust the inclination of each leg during construction. This was essential because the 4 legs had to meet at the first platform with perfect precision. Any misalignment, even by a few centimeters, would be catastrophic. The hydraulic jacks allowed Eiffel's engineers to make fine adjustments as the legs rose, ensuring that when they converged at the first platform, 57 meters above the ground, they fitted together exactly. It was like threading 4 needles simultaneously while blindfolded at a distance of 57 meters, and Eiffel did it perfectly. But before a single rivet was driven, the tower had to survive an assault of a different kind, not from wind or gravity, from words. On the 14th of February, 1887, just as construction was about to begin, the newspaper Le Temps published a letter that would become one of the most famous protests in the history of art. It was signed by some of the most distinguished writers, painters, sculptors, and architects in France, and it was addressed to the director of the Exposition, Monsieur Alphand. The letter began politely enough, but quickly built to a crescendo of outrage. We writers, painters, sculptors, architects, passionate lovers of the beauty of Paris, which until now has remained unspoiled, come to protest with all our strength and all our indignation, in the name of underestimated French taste, in the name of threatened French art and history, against the erection in the very heart of our capital of the useless and monstrous Eiffel Tower. The signatories were extraordinary. Guy de Maupassant, the greatest short story writer in France, Alexandre Dumas the Younger, son of the author of The Three Musketeers, Charles Gounod, the composer of Faust, William Adolphe Bouguereau, the most popular painter in France, Charles Garnier, the architect of the Paris Opera House, Leconte de Lisle, Sully Prudhomme, François Copy, poets and writers of the first rank. They called the tower a metal asparagus, a tragic street lamp, a skeleton, a dishonor to the city. They compared it to a factory chimney. They predicted it would crush the other monuments of Paris beneath its barbarous mass. They asked whether Paris, the city of taste and refinement and beauty, was truly going to be disfigured by this odious column of bolted sheet metal. Eiffel responded with characteristic calm. He pointed out that the signatories had not seen the finished tower because it had not been built yet. He argued that the tower's curves were mathematically determined and that mathematical curves possess their own beauty. He noted that the great Gothic cathedrals had also been considered monstrous when they were new, and he made a prediction that would prove prophetic. "I believe," he wrote, "that the tower will have its own beauty. Are we to believe that because one is an engineer, one is not preoccupied by beauty in one's constructions? Is it not true that the very conditions which give strength also conform to the hidden rules of harmony?" It was a remarkable statement, a defense of engineering as art, of function as beauty, of the idea that a structure designed purely to resist wind and gravity, with every element calculated and every rivet placed for a reason, could be beautiful precisely because it was honest. The protest had no effect. Construction continued. But the protest did have one lasting consequence. It placed the tower at the center of a debate that would echo through the history of architecture for a century and more. The debate between art and engineering, between tradition and modernity, between the beauty of the handmade and the beauty of the machine. The artists who signed the protest were defenders of a particular vision of beauty. To them, beauty meant carved stone and classical proportion. It meant the columns of the Madeleine and the arches of the Pont Neuf. It meant the work of human hands on natural materials. Iron, to them, was industrial. It was the stuff of railways and factories and warehouses. It had no place in the monumental landscape of Paris. Eiffel represented something different, a new aesthetic, the aesthetic of the engineer, beauty through calculation, elegance through efficiency. The idea that a structure could be beautiful not because it imitated the forms of the past, but because it expressed the forces of nature through the precision of mathematics. This debate was not resolved by the Eiffel Tower. It continues to this day, but the tower, simply by existing, by standing there in all its iron frankness, tipped the balance. It proved that engineering could produce beauty, that iron could move the heart, that mathematics and poetry were not enemies, but different expressions of the same human impulse to understand and order the world. The construction of the Eiffel Tower is one of the great engineering stories of the 19th century, and it begins not with iron, but with earth and water. The Champ de Mars, the site of the tower, is a large open field on the left bank of the Seine, stretching from the river southward to the École Militaire, the French military academy where Napoleon had studied as a young cadet. The ground is alluvial, composed of sand and gravel deposited by the river over thousands of years. Two of the tower's four legs, the ones nearest the Seine, would have to be sunk into ground that was saturated with river water. Eiffel's first challenge was the foundations. Each of the four legs would rest on a massive concrete foundation block, sunk deep into the ground to reach solid bearing strata. The two legs on the river's side required the use of compressed air caissons, sealed metal chambers that could be lowered into the waterlogged ground, while workers inside excavated the mud and gravel. It was dangerous work. The men worked in pressurized air, which could cause a painful and sometimes fatal condition known as caisson disease, or the bends, if they returned to normal pressure too quickly. The foundation work began on the 28th of January, 1887. Eiffel had exactly 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days to complete the tower before the opening of the Exposition on the 6th of May, 1889. It was an extraordinarily tight schedule for the tallest structure ever attempted. The foundations were completed by the end of June. 4 enormous blocks of concrete, each about 10 meters on a side and several meters deep, sat at the corners of a square 125 meters across. On each foundation, 16 iron anchoring bolts, each 7.5 meters long and set into the concrete, waited to receive the ironwork of the legs. And then the iron began to rise. Let us pause here for a moment. Close your eyes if you like. Imagine you are standing on the Champ de Mars in the spring of 1887. The foundation blocks are in place, 4 massive squares of grey concrete at the corners of the site. Iron anchor bolts protrude from each one, thick as a man's arm, pointing upward at the sky. Around them, the construction site is a chaos of activity. Horse carts deliver iron beams from the Levallois-Perret workshops. Workers sort and stack the prefabricated pieces according to numbered diagrams pinned to wooden boards. The sound of hammering echoes across the field. Steam hisses from portable engines. The air smells of iron and coal smoke and wet earth. And now, on each of the 4 foundation blocks, the first iron members are being set into place. Massive lattice girders, each one carefully calculated and pre-drilled at the workshop, are lowered into position by temporary wooden derricks and bolted to the anchor bolts. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the 4 legs of the tower begin to rise. They lean inward. This is the plan. The 4 legs are not vertical. They are inclined, tilting toward each other at a carefully calculated angle, so that they will converge at the first platform 57 meters above the ground. Watching them rise, you might feel a slight vertigo. The leaning columns of iron seem unstable. They seem to defy common sense. How can four leaning structures support each other? How can they meet at the top? But they do. This is the magic of the arch. The four legs of the Eiffel Tower are, in essence, four half-arches, leaning inward and supporting each other at the point where they meet. The compressive forces flow down the curves of the legs and into the foundations. The geometry is self-supporting. It is the same principle that holds up the arches of a cathedral, expressed in iron instead of stone. By the end of March 1887, the lower sections of all four legs were rising from their foundations. The tower was beginning to take shape. The iron for the Eiffel Tower came from the forges of Pompey, a town in northeastern France near Nancy. It was puddled iron, a type of wrought iron produced by stirring molten pig iron in a furnace to burn off the carbon. Puddled iron is strong in tension, flexible, and resistant to corrosion. It is not steel, which was available by the 1880s, but Eiffel preferred puddled iron for its predictability and its forgiveness. Steel was stronger, but it could be brittle. Iron would bend before it broke. The numbers are staggering. The tower contains approximately 7,300 tons of iron. This iron was shaped into 18,038 individual pieces, joined together by 2.5 million rivets. Every single piece was drawn in advance at Eiffel's workshops in Levallois-Perret, calculated to tolerances of 1/10 of a millimeter. Every hole was pre-drilled. Every rivet was sized. When the pieces arrived at the construction site, they fitted together like the parts of an enormous three-dimensional puzzle. This was Eiffel's genius, not the design of the tower itself, though that was remarkable, but the system of fabrication and assembly that made it possible to build. Nothing was improvised on site. Everything was planned. Every piece was numbered. Every joint was specified. The construction site was really an assembly site, where components manufactured with factory precision were bolted and riveted into their predetermined positions. The iron pieces arrived from Levallois-Perret on horse-drawn carts. They were lifted into position by steam-powered cranes that climbed the tower itself, rising on the tracks that would later carry the tower's elevators. The cranes were Eiffel's own design, and they were a marvel of ingenuity. As the tower rose, the cranes rose with it, always working at the leading edge of construction. The workforce numbered between 150 and 300 men, depending on the phase of construction. This was a remarkably small number for a project of this scale. The Great Pyramid of Giza, which stands less than half the height of the Eiffel Tower, is traditionally said to have required 20,000 workers. Notre Dame Cathedral took hundreds of masons and labourers working for nearly 2 centuries. Eiffel's tower would be built by a few hundred men in just over 2 years. The precision of the prefabrication made this possible. The workers were not shaping raw material on site. They were assembling pre-made components. Many of them were riveters, working in teams of 4. One man heated the rivets in a small portable forge until they glowed cherry red. A second man carried the hot rivet to the joint in a bucket and placed it in the pre-drilled hole. A third man held a heavy metal dolly against the head of the rivet on the inside of the joint. And the fourth man, the riveter proper, hammered the protruding end of the rivet flat with a heavy pneumatic hammer, forming the second head and clamping the pieces of iron together as the rivet cooled and contracted. This was done 2.5 million times. The work was physically demanding, and as the tower rose higher, it became genuinely terrifying. By the summer of 1887, the workers were riveting at heights of 50, 60, 70 meters. There were no safety nets. No harnesses, no hard hats. The men balanced on narrow iron beams, exposed to the wind and the rain and the vertigo-inducing void beneath their feet. They could see all of Paris spread out below them, the rooftops and the church spires and the dark ribbon of the Seine. In September of 1887, the workers went on strike. They were not objecting to the danger, which they accepted as part of the job. They wanted more money. The work was hazardous. The heights were extreme, and as the tower rose higher, the conditions grew worse. The wind was stronger. The temperature was colder. The walk to the work site at the top took longer and longer each day. Eiffel gave them a modest raise. The strike ended. The work continued. Remarkably, only one man died during the construction of the Eiffel Tower. His name was not recorded in the official accounts, and the circumstances of his death are unclear. Some sources suggest he fell while showing the tower to his fiancée on a Sunday, when construction was not underway. This extraordinary safety record for a project of this scale and danger in the 19th century was no accident. Eiffel was fanatical about safety. He installed guard rails and screens as the tower rose. He required that the movable wooden scaffolding used during construction be solid and secure. He paid attention to the conditions his men worked in, which was unusual for the time. As the tower rose through the winter of 1887 and into the spring of 1888, the people of Paris watched and argued. The artists' protest had made the tower the most talked-about structure in France. Everyone had an opinion. Newspapers ran daily columns about the construction. Caricatures showed the tower in every conceivable form, as a giraffe, as a lighthouse, as an antenna for communication with Mars. Some Parisians were genuinely frightened. They believed the tower would attract lightning and destroy the neighborhood. Others thought it would alter the weather. A mathematician named Edouard Lockroy reportedly calculated that the tower would fall over when it reached 229 meters, a prediction that Eiffel cheerfully ignored. But there was something else happening too, something that the protesters had not anticipated. People were beginning to like it. As the tower climbed past the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, as it rose above the domes and spires of Paris, as its graceful curves became visible from every part of the city, something shifted in the public mood. The tower was not ugly, it was strange, it was unprecedented, it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen, but it possessed a peculiar grace, the way the four legs arched inward and merged, the way the lattice ironwork created an ever-changing pattern of light and shadow, the way the whole structure seemed to narrow and taper and reach upward with a kind of yearning. It was, against all expectations, beautiful. Eiffel himself climbed the tower regularly during construction. He was 55 years old when the work began, and he was not a young man even by the standards of his time. But he climbed, he inspected, he encouraged his workers. He took photographs from the rising structure, capturing the extraordinary view of Paris that grew more expansive with each passing week. By the winter of 1888, the second platform was complete. The tower stood at 115 meters, already taller than the towers of Notre Dame. The ironwork above continued upward, and from below, the structure seemed to dissolve into the gray Paris sky. The third and final stage of construction was the most difficult. Above the second platform, the tower narrows dramatically. The four legs have merged into a single tapering column. The workers were now operating at 200 meters, 250 meters, approaching 300 meters above the ground. At these heights, The wind was a constant presence, even on a calm day at ground level. The air at 300 meters could be moving at considerable speed. The workers' tools and materials had to be hauled up by the steam cranes. Food and water were carried by hand. The men worked in shifts, beginning at dawn and stopping when the light failed. The metalwork at the summit is finer and more intricate than the heavy structural members of the legs. The third platform, at 276 meters, is a relatively small space enclosed by iron railings. Above it rises the lantern room, and above that, the flagpole that marks the very top of the tower. On the 31st of March, 1889, 5 weeks before the opening of the Exposition, Gustave Eiffel climbed the 1,710 steps from the ground to the summit. He carried a large French tricolor flag. His daughter Claire and his son-in-law Adolphe Sauls climbed with him, along with a group of dignitaries and government officials. Many of the officials gave up partway. The climb took over an hour, but Eiffel, at 57 years old, reached the top. He planted the flag. The tricolor snapped in the wind 300 meters above Paris. A 21-gun salute was fired from below. Eiffel stood at the summit of the tallest structure ever built by human hands and looked down at the city that had doubted him. The construction had taken 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days, almost exactly on schedule. The final cost was 7,799,401 francs and 31 centimes, slightly over budget, but Eiffel had already earned most of this back through advanced ticket sales and concession agreements. The tower was profitable before it was even finished. Let us pause for a moment. Let the scene settle in your mind. It is a spring morning in Paris. The year is 1889. The air is cool and fresh. The chestnut trees along the Seine are coming into leaf, and on the Champ de Mars, rising above the rooftops of the 7th arrondissement, above the dome of the Invalides and the towers of the distant cathedrals, stands a structure that no human being has ever seen before. 300 meters of iron, open to the sky, tapering from 4 enormous arching legs to a slender point that seems to touch the clouds. The morning light catches the ironwork and turns it golden. The shadows of the cross braces fall across the green lawns below in a pattern of geometric precision. Pigeons circle the first platform. The tricolor flag at the summit snaps in the wind. People stop in the street to look. They have watched this thing grow for 2 years, day by day, rivet by rivet. They have argued about it, complained about it, made jokes about it, but now, seeing it finished, complete, standing against the pale blue sky with a kind of serene confidence, many of them feel something unexpected. They feel proud. The Exposition Universelle of 1889 opened on the 6th of May. It was enormous. It covered 250 acres along the Seine and the Champ de Mars. More than 60,000 exhibitors from across the world displayed everything from steam engines to silk looms to the latest advances in electricity and telecommunications. Thomas Edison visited and presented Eiffel with one of his new phonographs. Buffalo Bill brought his Wild West show. The exhibition featured a reconstruction of a medieval street, a colonial pavilion, a hall of machines with enormous working engines, and galleries devoted to the fine arts and the liberal arts and the industrial arts. But the tower was the star. Visitors could ascend by elevator or by stairs. The elevators were themselves engineering marvels. The Otis Company, the American elevator manufacturer, had designed hydraulic lifts for the east and west legs. A French company, Rue Combelazier et Lepate, built the elevator in the north leg, and the south leg served as the staircase. The elevator ride to the first and second platforms was exhilarating. The cage rising at an angle through the iron lattice, the city falling away below. The view expanding with every passing second. On the first platform, at 57 meters, visitors found a restaurant, a theater, and a gallery. The second platform, at 115 meters, offered another restaurant and an observation deck, and the third platform, at 276 meters, was the summit experience. From here, on a clear day, the view extended 80 kilometers in every direction. The fields and forests and villages of the Ile-de-France spread out below like a map. Paris itself was reduced to a miniature, the great boulevards becoming thin gray lines, the Seine a silver thread, the rooftops a mosaic of gray and brown. Visitors were stunned. Many found the height genuinely unsettling. The wind plucked at their clothes and hats. The iron floor vibrated faintly beneath their feet. Looking straight down through the lattice, they could see the tiny figures of people on the ground far below, moving like insects. During the 6 months of the exposition, the tower received 1,896,987 visitors, nearly 2 million people. It was a sensation. The protests were forgotten. The metal asparagus had become the most popular attraction in Paris. Even Guy de Maupassant, who had signed the artist's protest letter, was said to eat lunch regularly at the restaurant on the first platform. When asked why he frequented a place he claimed to despise, he reportedly replied, "Because it is the only place in Paris where I do not have to look at it." The exposition was not just about the tower, of course. The Galerie des Machines, the Hall of Machines, was in many ways equally impressive. Designed by the architect Ferdinand Dutet and the engineer Victor Contamin, it was an enormous hall of iron and glass, 420 meters long and 115 meters wide, with a clear span that required no internal columns. Inside, the great machines of the industrial age thundered and hissed and clanked. Steam engines the size of houses, dynamos that generated electricity, printing presses that could produce a newspaper in seconds. It was a cathedral of industry, and visitors walked through it in wonder. But the tower drew them. The tower was the thing they talked about when they returned home, the thing they described to their friends and families, the thing that appeared in their photographs and their letters and their diaries, because the tower was not a machine. It was not useful in any obvious way. It was simply tall, impossibly, absurdly, gloriously tall, and the experience of ascending it, of rising above the city in a clanking hydraulic elevator, of stepping out onto the platform and feeling the wind and seeing the world spread out below like a painting, was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. The tower changed the way people saw the world. Before the Eiffel Tower, the only way to see the Earth from above was in a balloon. Balloon ascents were expensive and rare and not a little frightening. The tower offered the same experience, the aerial view, the God's eye perspective, in safety and comfort. For the price of a few francs, anyone could see the world from 300 meters up. This was not a small thing. The aerial view, the view from above, would come to define the 20th century. The aeroplane, the satellite, the drone, the tower was an early intimation of all of this, a foretaste of the age of flight. At the very summit of the tower, above the third platform, Gustave Eiffel had built himself a small apartment. It was a simple space, a sitting room, a bedroom, a tiny kitchen. The walls were lined with floral wallpaper. There was a piano, a few bookshelves, some comfortable chairs, a table for working. It was furnished in the bourgeois style of the time, modest, respectable, the kind of room you might find in any well-to-do Parisian home. Except that it was 300 meters in the air. Eiffel used this apartment as a private retreat. He entertained guests there, including Thomas Edison, who visited during the Exposition and signed the guest book. Eiffel also used the apartment for scientific observations, recording weather data, conducting experiments with air resistance, and making astronomical observations through a small telescope mounted on the balcony. But there was something else about the apartment, something that reveals the man behind the engineer. Eiffel had lost his wife, Marie Gordelet, in 1877. She died at the age of 32, leaving him with 5 children. He never remarried. He devoted himself to his work and to his children and to the tower that bore his name. The apartment at the summit was his sanctuary, his place apart from the world, 300 meters above the noise and the crowds and the demands of his business and his fame. He could sit in his quiet parlor, read a book, listen to the wind against the iron, and look out over the city that he had, in some small way, remade. The apartment still exists today. It has been restored and can be glimpsed by visitors to the 3rd platform through a glass window. Wax figures of Eiffel and Edison sit at the table, frozen in their eternal conversation. Now, the exposition ended on the 31st of October, 1889. The pavilions were dismantled, the exhibits were packed away, the crowds dispersed, and the Eiffel Tower, still standing, still gleaming, still impossibly tall against the Paris sky, began its 20-year countdown. The terms of Eiffel's contract were clear. He held the concession until 1909. After that, the tower belonged to the city, and the city had made no promises about keeping it. But before we come to the tower's fight for survival, we must tell a darker chapter in Gustave Eiffel's life. Because in the years immediately after the Exposition, the man who had built the most famous structure in the world would see his reputation nearly destroyed. The Panama Canal scandal. In 1880, a French company led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, the celebrated engineer who had built the Suez Canal, began work on a canal across the Isthmus of Panama. Eiffel's company was contracted to design and build the canal's locks. It was an enormous project, far larger than the Suez Canal, and it was beset by problems from the start. The tropical climate was murderous. Workers died in their thousands from yellow fever and malaria. The engineering challenges were vastly more complex than anyone had anticipated. The jungle swallowed machinery and men with equal indifference. By 1889, the year of the tower's triumph, the Panama Canal Company had collapsed. It had spent nearly 1.5 billion francs, an astronomical sum, and the canal was nowhere near completion. Hundreds of thousands of small French investors had lost their savings. It was the greatest financial scandal France had ever seen. And Eiffel was implicated. He had not been involved in the financial mismanagement. His role had been purely technical, designing the locks. But in 1893, he was charged with fraud and misuse of funds, along with de Lesseps and several others. The trial was a sensation. The man who had built the Eiffel Tower, the hero of the Exposition, stood in the dock like a common criminal. Eiffel was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison and a fine of 20,000 francs, but the conviction was overturned on appeal on a technicality related to the statute of limitations. He was exonerated legally, but the damage to his reputation was severe. He resigned from his company. He withdrew from public life. The magician of iron had been brought low. But Eiffel did not retreat into bitterness. He turned to science. He built a wind tunnel at the base of the tower and conducted experiments on aerodynamics. He studied meteorology. He published scientific papers. He made the tower a laboratory, and in doing so, he began to build the case for the tower's survival. Many Parisians assumed the tower would be demolished. The artists' protest had faded from the headlines, but the sentiment had not entirely disappeared. The tower was a commercial structure, a money-making machine, not a monument in the traditional sense. It was not a cathedral or a palace or a memorial. It had no historical significance, no cultural weight. It was, in the eyes of many, simply a very large piece of temporary engineering that had outstayed its welcome. And there were practical arguments for demolition. The tower occupied a significant piece of land on the Champ de Mars. It dominated the skyline. It cast shadows. Maintaining it was expensive. The iron had to be painted regularly to prevent rust, and the costs would fall on the city once the concession expired. Eiffel knew that the tower's survival was not guaranteed, and so, with the same methodical determination that had built the tower in the first place, he set about making it indispensable. Science became the tower's salvation. From the very beginning, Eiffel had conceived of the tower as more than a monument. He saw it as a scientific instrument, a laboratory 300 meters in the air, a platform for experiments that could not be conducted anywhere else. He established a meteorological station on the third platform. He installed barometers and thermometers and anemometers, instruments for measuring air pressure and temperature and wind speed. He recorded observations faithfully, contributing data to the growing science of atmospheric study. He conducted experiments on air resistance, dropping objects of various shapes from the tower and measuring their descent. This work was directly relevant to the emerging science of aerodynamics, and it contributed to the understanding of flight that would lead to the Wright brothers' achievement at Kitty Hawk in 1903. He allowed scientists to use the tower for their own experiments. Physicists studied atmospheric electricity. Astronomers made observations. A pendulum experiment demonstrated the rotation of the Earth, extending the work that Leon Foucault had begun in the Pantheon 40 years earlier. But the experiment that saved the tower was wireless telegraphy. In 1898, 9 years after the tower's completion, a young Italian inventor named Guglielmo Marconi demonstrated that electromagnetic waves could be transmitted and received over long distances without wires. This was the birth of radio, and radio needed towers, tall towers. The higher the antenna, the farther the signal could travel. The Eiffel Tower was the tallest structure in the world. It was an obvious choice. In 1903, the French military began conducting wireless telegraphy experiments from the tower. A transmitter was installed at the summit. Signals were sent and received over increasingly long distances. By 1904, the tower was communicating with stations across France. By 1906, it was reaching stations in North Africa. The military implications were obvious. France was surrounded by potential adversaries. Germany, the great rival, shared a long and contentious border to the east. The ability to communicate instantly, without wires that could be cut, without messenger pigeons that could be shot down, was of enormous strategic value. In 1908, the French army established a permanent radio station in the tower. The antenna at the summit was improved and extended. The tower became a node in France's military communications network, capable of sending and receiving messages across hundreds of kilometers. And so, when the 20-year concession expired in 1909, the question of demolishing the tower was no longer purely aesthetic. Tearing down the Eiffel Tower would mean dismantling a vital piece of military infrastructure. It would mean blinding the army's communications. It would mean, quite literally, weakening France's national defense. The tower's concession was renewed. The temporary structure had made itself permanent, not through beauty or sentiment, but through sheer utility. Eiffel had saved his tower, not with arguments about art, with radio waves. In 1909, the year the concession was renewed, something happened that brought the tower into the newspapers for entirely different reasons. A man named Victor Lustig arrived in Paris. He was a confidence trickster of extraordinary audacity, a Czech-born con artist who spoke 5 languages and dressed impeccably. Lustig had read newspaper articles speculating about the tower's future, about the cost of maintaining it, about the possibility of its demolition, and he had an idea. Lustig forged government credentials, identifying himself as a Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He invited 6 scrap metal dealers to a confidential meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most prestigious hotels in Paris. There, over coffee and cognac, he explained that the government had decided to sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap. The maintenance costs were too high. The decision was sensitive, politically embarrassing, and had to be handled discreetly. He was seeking bids. The dealers examined the specifications, 7,000 tons of iron. The bidding was competitive. Lustig selected a dealer named André Poisson, who seemed the most eager and the most gullible. Poisson paid for the tower in cash, and Lustig left Paris on the next train with a suitcase full of money. It took Poisson some time to realize he had been swindled. He was too embarrassed to go to the police, and Lustig, emboldened by his success, returned to Paris and tried to sell the tower again. This time, the mark went to the police, but Lustig had already vanished. He was eventually caught years later in the United States, convicted of counterfeiting, and died in Alcatraz in 1947. But his sale of the Eiffel Tower remains one of the most brazen confidence tricks in history. He sold a national monument twice. The story is amusing in retrospect, but it tells us something important about the tower's status in the early 20th century. It was still seen, by some, as disposable, as something that might plausibly be sold for scrap. Lustig's con worked because the idea of tearing down the tower was not absurd. It was a live possibility, a real option that real people in real government offices were still discussing. This would change, but slowly. Meanwhile, Gustave Eiffel was growing old. After the Panama scandal, He had devoted himself entirely to science. His wind tunnel at the base of the tower, built in 1909, was one of the first purpose-built aerodynamic research facilities in the world. He tested wing shapes and airfoil profiles that would be used in the design of the earliest aircraft. He published hundreds of pages of data on air resistance. He corresponded with the Wright brothers and with other pioneers of aviation. The wind tunnel that Eiffel built was not a toy. It was a serious scientific instrument. Air was drawn through a chamber 2 meters in diameter by a large fan driven by a steam engine. Inside the chamber, models of wings and fuselages and other shapes were mounted on sensitive balances that measured the forces acting on them. Eiffel tested hundreds of configurations. He published the results in meticulous detail. Tables and graphs and equations that were used by aircraft designers for decades. His aerodynamic work was directly relevant to the development of early aviation. The Voisin brothers, Gabriel and Charles, used Eiffel's data in designing some of the first practical aircraft in France. Eiffel corresponded with Alberto Santos Dumont, the Brazilian aviator who made the first powered flight in Europe in 1906. He contributed to the design of aircraft wings used in the First World War. The man who had built the tallest structure on Earth was now helping to build the machines that would fly above it. In his later years, he was a familiar figure on the Champ de Mars, a tall, thin, dignified old man in a dark suit and top hat, walking slowly through the gardens beneath his tower. He had outlived his wife by nearly half a century. He had outlived most of his contemporaries. He had outlived the protests and the scandals and the wars, but the tower was still there, standing exactly where he had placed it, a little rustier, a little more beloved, but fundamentally unchanged. Gustave Eiffel died on the 27th of December, 1923, in his mansion on the Rue Rivets in Paris. He was 91 years old. He had been listening to Beethoven on his gramophone when he died. The tower, his tower, stood silently across the city, 300 meters of iron, still standing, still reaching upward, still defying the expectations of everyone who had ever doubted it. The tower entered the 20th century as something new, no longer a temporary structure threatened with demolition, no longer merely a tourist attraction. It was now a tool of science and technology, and it was about to play a role in one of the most dramatic episodes of the First World War. In August of 1914, Germany invaded France. The German armies swept through Belgium and into northern France, advancing with terrifying speed toward Paris. By early September, the Germans were within 30 miles of the capital. The French government evacuated to Bordeaux. Paris prepared for siege. The tower played a crucial role in what happened next. The French military had been intercepting German radio communications using the equipment installed at the summit. And in early September of 1914, as the German armies approached Paris, French radio operators at the tower intercepted a message that would change the course of the war. The intercepted communication revealed that the German First Army under General Alexander von Kluck was turning eastward, away from Paris, to pursue the retreating French Fifth Army. This meant that the German flank was exposed. Von Kluck had turned his back on Paris, creating a gap between his forces and the German Second Army to his right. This intelligence was relayed to the French High Command. General Joseph Gallieni, the military governor of Paris, recognized the opportunity. He ordered a counterattack. 600 Parisian taxi cabs were commandeered to rush reinforcements to the front. The famous taxis of the Marne carried several thousand soldiers through the night to plug the gap in the French lines. The Battle of the Marne, which raged from the 5th to the 12th of September 1914, stopped the German advance. Paris was saved. The war settled into the grinding trench warfare that would last for 4 more years. But the battle might have gone very differently without the intelligence gathered from the Eiffel Tower's radio station. The tower had proven its military value. It was no longer just a monument, it was a weapon. There is a small detail about the Battle of the Marne that deserves mention. The 600 taxi cabs that carried soldiers to the front were Renault AG1s, small, boxy automobiles with a maximum speed of about 25 kilometers per hour. Each cab carried 5 soldiers in addition to the driver. The fare, charged at the standard metered rate, was later reimbursed by the army. The total bill came to about 70,000 francs. It was the first time in history that motor vehicles had been used to move troops to a battle. A small detail perhaps, but it was a sign of the times. The age of the horse was ending, the age of the machine was beginning, and the Eiffel Tower, that monument to the machine age, stood at the center of it all. The tower served throughout the remaining 4 years of the war. Its radio equipment was upgraded and expanded. It became the primary hub of France's military communications network. Signals intelligence, the interception and analysis of enemy radio traffic, became an increasingly important weapon as the war dragged on. And much of this intelligence passed through the equipment at the top of the Eiffel Tower. The tower had another wartime role that is less well known, but equally dramatic. Mata Hari, the Dutch-born exotic dancer and courtesan whose real name was Margaretha Zell, was one of the most famous women in Europe in the years before the war. She had reinvented herself as a Javanese temple dancer, performing in the salons of Paris in costumes that were scandalous by the standards of the era. She moved in the highest circles of European society, and she had lovers on both sides of the conflict. In 1917, the French intelligence services concluded that Mata Hari was spying for Germany. Much of the evidence against her came from intercepted radio communications, decoded at the Eiffel Tower's military radio station. The messages appeared to show that she was sending information to the Germans about French troop movements and military plans. She was arrested in February of 1917. Her trial was swift and controversial. The evidence was largely circumstantial, and many historians now believe she was a scapegoat, a convenient target for French intelligence services that needed to demonstrate they were catching spies. On the 15th of October, 1917, Mata Hari was executed by firing squad at the fortress of Vincennes on the outskirts of Paris. She was 41 years old. She reportedly refused a blindfold and blew a kiss to the firing squad. The Eiffel Tower's role in her case remains a subject of debate. Were the intercepted messages genuine? Was she really a spy? Or was she simply a woman who moved between worlds, who knew too many people on both sides, and who was destroyed by the paranoia and the brutality of war? We do not know, but the tower, that great iron antenna humming with wireless signals, played its part in her story, and in so many others that we will never know. The First World War ended on the 11th of November, 1918. The tower had survived, France had survived, but at an appalling cost. Nearly 1.5 million French soldiers were dead, millions more were wounded. The countryside of northern France was a wasteland of trenches and barbed wire and unexploded shells. The tower stood above it all, undamaged, its iron lattice intact, a reminder of what France had been before the catastrophe, and perhaps a promise of what it might become again. Gustave Eiffel was 86 years old when the war ended. He had lived through the siege of Paris, the Commune, the Panama scandal, and now the greatest war in human history. He continued his scientific work at the tower, recording meteorological data, conducting aerodynamic experiments, contributing quietly to the advancement of knowledge. He was an old man now, but he still climbed the stairs when he could. After the war, the tower settled into a new role. It was no longer merely a monument or a military installation. It had become the broadcasting heart of France. In 1921, the first public radio broadcasts were transmitted from the tower. A station called Radio La, later renamed Radio Paris, began regular programming, music, news, weather reports. The disembodied voices carried on electromagnetic waves from the antenna at the summit, reaching households across France and beyond. This was the dawn of the broadcasting age, and the Eiffel Tower was at the center of it. By the 1920s, radio had transformed daily life. Families gathered around their receivers in the evening, listening to concerts and comedies and political speeches and the results of horse races. And many of these broadcasts originated from the tower. The 1920s also brought a different kind of spectacle to the tower. In 1925, the automobile manufacturer André Citroën rented the tower for an extraordinary advertisement. 200,000 light bulbs were installed on the structure, spelling out the word Citroën in letters that could be read from kilometers away. The tower became the world's largest billboard. The lights burned from 1925 to 1934. And they were visible to Charles Lindbergh when he approached Paris at the end of his transatlantic flight in 1927. The tower was also the scene of more eccentric activities. In 1912, a tailor named Franz Reichelt had jumped from the first platform wearing a homemade parachute suit of his own design. It did not work. Reichelt fell 57 meters to his death. The incident was filmed by newsreel cameras, and the footage still exists. A terrible few seconds of flapping fabric and a small dark figure tumbling through the air. In the same period, various daredevils climbed the exterior of the tower, rode bicycles down the stairs, and attempted other stunts of varying degrees of foolishness. The tower attracted the adventurous and the reckless in equal measure. But beneath the spectacle, the tower was aging. The iron required constant maintenance. Every 7 years, the entire structure had to be repainted. This was, and remains, an enormous task. 60 tons of paint are required. 25 painters work for 15 to 18 months to complete a single painting cycle. They begin at the top and work their way down, applying 3 coats of paint to every surface, every beam, every rivet, every member of the lattice. The paint is not merely decorative, it is essential. Without it, the iron would rust. Corrosion would weaken the structure. The tower would eventually deteriorate and collapse. The paint is the tower's immune system, the thin layer of protection that stands between the iron and the elements. The color has changed over the years. The tower was originally painted Venetian red, a dark reddish brown. Later it was changed to yellow-brown, then ochre. Today it is painted in a color called Eiffel Tower brown, a shade specifically formulated for the structure, darker at the base and lighter toward the top to create an illusion of uniform color against the sky. Now, let us come to the darkest chapter in the tower's story, the German occupation of Paris. On the 14th of June 1940, the German army entered Paris. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. The government had fled south. The city was declared an open city to prevent its destruction, and the soldiers of the Wehrmacht marched down the Champs-Élysées, past the Arc de Triomphe, past the shuttered shops and the drawn curtains of a city in shock. Adolf Hitler visited Paris on the 23rd of June. He arrived at dawn, driven through the empty streets in a convoy of Mercedes-Benz staff cars. He visited the opera, which he admired enormously, and the Invalides, where he stood in silence before the tomb of Napoleon. And he went to the Trocadero, the terrace on the hill across the river from the tower, to be photographed with the Eiffel Tower in the background. But Hitler did not climb the tower, and this is where the story takes a defiant turn. Shortly before the Germans arrived, someone, possibly the tower's maintenance staff, had cut the cables of the elevators. The lifts would not work. If Hitler wanted to reach the summit, he would have to climb the 1,710 steps. He did not. The story has become part of Parisian folklore. He may have conquered France, the saying goes, but he did not conquer the Eiffel Tower. It is a small act of defiance, perhaps a symbolic gesture. The tower could not resist the occupation. It could not drive out the invaders, but it could refuse to carry them to the top. The Germans tried to repair the elevators, but the necessary parts were, mysteriously, unavailable. The elevators remained out of service for the duration of the occupation. When a group of German soldiers attempted to fly a swastika flag from the summit, they discovered that the flag was too large for the wind at that height. It was torn to shreds within hours. A smaller flag was installed, but it too was later removed under circumstances that remain unclear. French resistance fighters managed to fly a tricolor flag from the tower during the occupation. The flag was visible across Paris, a dangerous and thrilling act of defiance that could have resulted in the arrest and execution of everyone involved. The flag was taken down by the Germans, but the message had been delivered. There is one more detail about the occupation that deserves telling. In August of 1944, as the Allied armies approached Paris, Hitler gave an order. He told his military governor of Paris, General Dietrich von Choltitz, to destroy the city. "Is Paris burning?" Hitler demanded in a phone call from his headquarters. He wanted the bridges blown, the monuments destroyed, the Eiffel Tower pulled down. Von Choltitz had explosives placed at the base of the tower. Charges were set on the bridges across the Seine. The great city that had sheltered civilization for 1,000 years was to be reduced to rubble, a final act of spite by a regime that was crumbling. Von Choltitz did not carry out the order. Why he disobeyed remains a subject of historical debate. Was it conscience, pragmatism, a calculation that the war was lost and that destroying Paris would serve no purpose? Whatever his reasons, he held back. The explosives were not detonated. The bridges were not blown. The tower was not pulled down. Paris was liberated on the 25th of August, 1944. French and American soldiers entered the city to scenes of extraordinary joy. Crowds lined the streets, women threw flowers, men wept. And at the Eiffel Tower, French soldiers raced to the summit. They raised the tricolor, and the tower, which had endured 4 years of occupation in sullen mechanical defiance, was free. The elevators were repaired. The tower reopened to the public. Allied soldiers on leave climbed to the summit and looked out over the city they had helped to save. The Eiffel Tower had survived another war, another threat of destruction, another chapter in its improbable story of endurance. The post-war years brought new changes to the tower. In 1957, a television antenna was added to the summit, extending the tower's height from 300 meters to 320 meters, and later, with further modifications, to its current height of 330 meters. Television was the new technology, and the tower served it as faithfully as it had served radio. The antenna at the summit broadcast signals across the Paris region, bringing the flickering images of the new medium into millions of homes. The tower had found yet another reason to exist, yet another technology that needed its height. The tower also played a role in the early space age. In 1962, France's fledgling space program used the tower's transmitter to track its first satellite, *1, launched from a base in the Sahara. The tower had gone from radio to television to satellite communication in just half a century. Each new technology found a use for those 300 meters of height. Each new technology gave the tower another reason to exist. The 1960s and 70s brought a tourism boom. Air travel was becoming affordable. Tourists from around the world flocked to Paris, and the Eiffel Tower was invariably their first stop. By the 1970s, the tower was receiving more than 4 million visitors per year. The experience of visiting the tower had become a ritual. You approached from the Trocadero, crossing the Seine on the Pont d'Iéna, the tower growing larger with every step until it filled your entire field of vision. You stood beneath the iron lattice and looked up, straight up, through the crisscrossing beams to the sky above. The perspective was dizzying. The 4 legs seemed to lean inward and converge far above your head, the ironwork getting finer and smaller the higher it went, until it vanished into the gray or blue or cloud-filled sky. You bought your ticket, you joined the queue, you shuffled forward with the other visitors, tourists from Japan and Brazil and Germany and the United States and 100 other countries. The elevator doors opened, you stepped inside. The cage began to move, and slowly, with a faint mechanical hum, the ground fell away. The first platform, you stepped out onto the iron floor. The wind was cooler here. You could see the Champ de Mars below, the green lawns, the paths, the tiny figures of people walking. In the distance, the dome of the Invalides, the roof of the Grand Palais, the curve of the Seine. The second platform, higher now, the city had flattened. The buildings had lost their height. Only the tallest structures still rose above the general level of the rooftops, the towers of Notre Dame, the dome of Sacré-Cœur on Montmartre, the skyscrapers of La Défense far to the west. Paris lay before you like a map, a living, breathing, moving map of a living city. And then, if you were brave or curious or simply determined, the summit, the third platform, 276 meters, the view was extraordinary. On a clear day, you could see for 80 kilometers, the forests and fields of the countryside, the thread of the river winding through the landscape, the curvature of the horizon itself, the faintest suggestion that the earth beneath you was round. The wind was strong up here. It pulled at your hair and your clothes. The iron vibrated faintly beneath your feet, a barely perceptible tremor that reminded you that you were standing on a structure made by human hands, a structure that moved and flexed and breathed with the weather. You were not standing on bedrock, you were standing on iron that bent and swayed and sang in the wind. The original hydraulic elevators had been replaced, new restaurants had been installed. The observation decks were modernized. The tower was constantly being updated, adapted, improved, while remaining in its essential form exactly as Eiffel had built it. In 1985, a major renovation program began. The tower was lightened by removing over 1,000 tons of unnecessary material that had accumulated over the decades. Old equipment, unused platforms, defunct installations. New elevators were installed. The restaurants were redesigned, and a new lighting system was created that would transform the tower's appearance at night. The night lighting of the Eiffel Tower is one of the great spectacles of modern Paris. The original sodium lamps that had illuminated the tower for decades were replaced in 1985 with a system of 336 projectors mounted within the tower's structure. These projectors cast a warm golden light upward through the lattice, making the iron seem to glow from within. The effect was stunning. The tower at night became something different from the tower by day. By day, it is an iron structure, impressive, engineering, solid. By night, it becomes something ethereal. A column of golden light rising into the darkness, a beacon. In 2000, to celebrate the millennium, 20,000 light bulbs were installed on the tower, not floodlights, individual bulbs mounted on the iron lattice itself, and every hour on the hour, from dusk until 1 in the morning, these lights sparkle. The sparkling lasts 5 minutes. The bulbs flash in random patterns, creating an effect that can only be described as magical. The tower seems to shimmer, to vibrate, to dance with light. It is one of those rare instances where technology creates something that feels like enchantment. Tourists gather on the Trocadero and along the banks of the Seine to watch. Couples hold hands, children point upward, and the tower sparkles in the darkness like something from a fairy tale. The sparkling display was originally intended to be temporary, installed only for the Millennium celebrations, but it was so popular, so beloved, that it was made permanent, like the tower itself. What was meant to be temporary became eternal. Let us pause here and consider the tower as it stands today, because the numbers alone are remarkable. 7 million visitors per year, the most visited paid monument in the world. More than 300 million people have climbed or ridden to its platforms since it opened in 1889. It generates over 100 million euros in annual revenue. It employs more than 500 people full-time. The tower has 3 visitor levels. The first floor, at 57 meters, features a glass floor section where visitors can look straight down through the transparent surface to the ground below. There are restaurants and exhibition spaces and a small cinema. The second floor, at 115 meters, offers the celebrated Jules Verne restaurant, one of the finest dining experiences in Paris, and panoramic viewing areas. The third floor, at 276 meters, is the Summit Experience, the highest publicly accessible point in Paris. The tower is repainted every 7 years. The current painting cycle takes approximately 18 months and uses 60 tons of paint applied by hand. The painters work in all weathers, suspended from ropes and platforms hundreds of meters above the ground. They are among the most specialized workers in France. The tower sways in the wind. At the summit, the movement can be as much as 12 centimeters in strong winds, On a hot day, thermal expansion of the iron can cause the summit to lean as much as 18 centimeters away from the sun. Gustave Eiffel designed the structure to accommodate these movements. The iron flexes, it bends, but it does not break. The tower's four legs are oriented precisely toward the four cardinal points of the compass: north, south, east, west. This was Eiffel's choice, and it gives the tower a formal, almost ceremonial relationship with the landscape around it. And the tower continues to grow, not in iron, but in antennae. Broadcasting equipment added over the decades has extended the structure from its original 300 meters to 330 meters. Radio, television, digital broadcasting, mobile telephone networks. The tower carries signals for more than 100 stations. It is, as Eiffel always intended, a working structure, not a monument to the past, a tool of the present. There is another side to the tower's story that is rarely told: the people who have jumped from it. Since its opening in 1889, the Eiffel Tower has been a site of tragedy as well as spectacle. Hundreds of people have taken their lives by jumping from its platforms. The tower's management does not publicize these events and has installed barriers and safety glass to prevent them. But the tower's height and its accessibility have made it, for some, a final destination. We will not dwell on this, but it is part of the tower's story. The same structure that inspires wonder and joy and romance in millions of visitors each year is also a place of profound sadness for others. The tower does not judge, it stands, it endures. It is used for every human purpose. The Eiffel Tower has been the subject of art from the moment it was built, and the artists who once despised it came to love it. Robert Delaunay painted the tower obsessively, creating dozens of canvases that fragmented and abstracted the structure into kaleidoscopic patterns of color and light. His series of Eiffel Tower paintings, created between 1909 and 1912, are among the masterpieces of early modern art. Delaunay saw in the tower everything that the protesting artists of 1887 had failed to see. He saw dynamism, energy, the spirit of the modern age expressed in iron. Marc Chagall painted the tower in his dreamlike compositions, floating above Paris in impossible skies, alongside lovers and violinists and flying goats. Henry Rousseau set his naive scenes against its backdrop. Georges Seurat captured it in pointillist dots of color. The tower became the most painted structure in Paris, surpassing even Notre Dame. Photographers discovered the tower early. The great Henri Cartier-Bresson photographed it from unexpected angles, making it new. Brassai captured it at night, glowing through the fog of the 1930s. Robert Doisneau placed it in the background of his famous photographs of Parisian life: lovers kissing, children playing, the tower always there, always watching, a silent participant in the life of the city. Writers too were drawn to the tower. Roland Barthes wrote a celebrated essay, La Tour Eiffel, in which he argued that the tower was present to the entire world and that it was the pure sign of Paris itself. The tower, he wrote, was the absolute symbol of the city, an utterly useless monument that had become absolutely necessary. Guy de Maupassant, who had signed the protest, died in 1893. He did not live to see the tower become the symbol of Paris, but one suspects he might have been quietly pleased. Writers love to be wrong about the things they hate. It makes for better stories. The tower has also become one of the most filmed structures in the world. Almost every film set in Paris, from the earliest silent movies to the biggest Hollywood blockbusters, features the tower. It is the visual shorthand for Paris. One glimpse of that iron silhouette, and the audience knows where they are. No other building in the world possesses this power of instant recognition to the same degree. In 1953, a young American singer named Eartha Kitt recorded a song called C'est Bon. In the music video, the tower appeared behind her like a stage set. In 1964, a French film called Les Parapluies de Cherbourg used the tower as a backdrop for its tale of lost love. In 2001, the film Amélie placed the tower in the background of a whimsical Paris that seemed to exist out of time. A city of cobblestone streets and neighborhood cafes where the tower was always there, always visible, always watching. The tower has been the site of marriage proposals and wedding photographs and anniversary celebrations beyond counting. It has been called the most romantic structure in the world, though Gustave Eiffel, that sober, methodical engineer, would probably have found this description mystifying. He built a tower. People fell in love under it. The connection between these two facts is one of those mysteries that engineering cannot explain. There is a tradition, unofficial but widely observed, that couples who kiss beneath the Eiffel Tower will be bound together forever. There is no evidence for this, but the tradition persists, and on any given evening, if you walk through the gardens of the Champ de Mars, you will see couples from every country on Earth standing together in the shadow of the tower, looking up at the iron lattice and kissing. Gustave Eiffel would not have understood, but he might have smiled. There is one more chapter in the tower's story that deserves our attention, the question of whether and when it might finally be replaced. Every few decades, someone proposes that the Eiffel Tower be demolished or replaced or supplemented with a newer, taller, more modern structure. These proposals are never taken seriously. The tower is too deeply embedded in the identity of Paris, too valuable as a revenue generator, too beloved by too many people to be threatened. But the tower is aging. The iron is original, the same puddled iron from the forges of Pompeii that was riveted into place in 1887 and 88. It has been maintained with extraordinary care, but iron does not last forever. Rust is patient. It works at the molecular level, atom by atom, converting iron oxide back into the earth from which it came. The painting program is the primary defense against corrosion, but in 2022, reports emerged that the tower was suffering from significant rust damage. The paint had not been properly maintained in some areas. Corrosion had been found on structural members. The management dismissed the reports as exaggerated, but independent engineers confirmed that the tower was in need of significant repair work. A major renovation program was launched, the most extensive in the tower's history. Parts of the structure were stripped back to bare metal and repainted. Corroded sections were repaired or replaced. The work was expected to take several years and cost hundreds of millions of euros. The tower's influence extends far beyond Paris. It has been copied, imitated, and referenced all over the world. There are replica Eiffel Towers in Las Vegas and Tokyo and Shenzhen and Islamabad. The Tokyo Tower, built in 1958, was directly inspired by the Eiffel Tower and stands at 333 meters, 3 meters taller than the original. The Blackpool Tower in England, built in 1894, is a smaller but faithful homage. There are Eiffel Tower replicas in amusement parks and shopping centers and town squares on every continent. But none of them are the real thing. None of them stand on the banks of the Seine. None of them cast their shadow across the Champ de Mars. None of them have the patina of 130 years of Parisian weather, the rust and the paint, and the memory of 2 world wars and 100 million visitors. The copies are iron. The original is iron and history cannot be copied. The tower will survive. It has survived artists' protests and world wars and confidence tricksters and a century of Parisian weather. It will survive rust, but it is a reminder that even the most iconic structures require constant care. That permanence is not a state, but a process, a daily, ongoing act of maintenance and attention and love. Let us return now to where we began, to the banks of the Seine, to the night. The tower stands in darkness, but it is not dark, it glows. 20,000 light bulbs trace its outline against the sky. The golden light washes upward through the lattice, illuminating each crossbrace and diagonal, each rivet and each bolt, picking out the intricate geometry that Gustave Eiffel's engineers calculated with pencil and paper more than a century ago. The Seine flows past in silence. The water catches the tower's reflection and breaks it into ribbons of gold on the dark surface. Boats pass slowly, their passengers looking up. On the Trocadero, a few late visitors stand at the railing and watch. The city hums around them, taxis and bicycles, and the distant murmur of cafes closing for the night. It is late. The sparkling display has finished for the evening. The tower settles into its steady glow, patient, calm, 330 meters of iron, held together by 2.5 million rivets, standing exactly where it has stood since March of 1889. Gustave Eiffel is gone now. He has been gone for more than 100 years, but his tower remains, and sometimes, late at night, when the crowds have gone home and the lights have settled into their steady golden glow, you can almost feel him there, the old engineer, standing on his private balcony at the summit, looking out over the city he loved, the city that doubted him, the city that came to love his tower more than he could ever have imagined. He is buried in the Cimetière de Levallois-Perret, the suburb where his workshops once stood. His grave is modest, a simple stone. Visitors leave flowers sometimes, and sometimes, on the stone, they leave small iron rivets, tokens of an industry that has moved on, relics of an age that the tower has outlived. Think of all the sunsets the tower has seen, more than 50,000 of them, each one casting the iron lattice in a different light, red gold in summer, pale silver in winter, rose and amber in spring. The tower has watched the seasons turn for 130 years, and each time the light changes, the tower changes with it. It is never quite the same structure twice. The same iron, but different light, different shadows, different moods. Think of the storms, the thunder rolling across the Paris sky, lightning striking the antenna at the summit, as it does several times each year, the rain streaming down the iron beams, pooling in the joints and channels, dripping from the lattice onto the lawns below. The tower does not flinch. It was designed for this. The lightning rod at the summit carries the charge safely to the ground. The iron conducts. The iron endures. Think of the snow, Paris in December, the tower powdered white, the iron so cold it burns the skin, the tourists in their scarves and gloves, riding the elevators to the summit, stepping out into the bitter wind, and seeing Paris spread out below them under a blanket of white, the rooftops, the bridges, the bare trees along the quays, everything still, everything quiet, everything covered in snow. The tower has seen all of this, 130 winters, 130 springs, the chestnuts blooming on the Champ de Mars, the children running through the gardens, the lovers on the benches, the old men feeding pigeons. Life, ordinary, beautiful, unremarkable life, going on below the tower, as it always has, as it always will. The tower will stand tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. It will stand when the paint is fresh and when the paint is fading. It will stand in rain and in sunshine and in the grey light of a Paris winter. It will stand when the tourists come in summer and when the city is quiet in January. It will stand. Not because it is permanent, nothing is permanent, but because people choose every day to keep it standing, to paint it, to maintain it, to repair the rust and replace the bulbs and tighten the bolts. The Eiffel Tower is not a monument to engineering, not really. It is a monument to the human decision to care, to maintain, to preserve what is beautiful and useful and dear. Gustave Eiffel understood this. He knew that his tower would not last forever on its own. He knew that iron returns to rust and rust returns to earth. He knew that the only thing standing between his creation and oblivion was human attention, human effort, human love. And so, every 7 years, the painters climb. They begin at the top, 300 meters above the ground, and they work their way down. 60 tons of paint, 18 months of careful, painstaking work, brush by brush, rivet by rivet, a ritual of renewal that has been performed more than 19 times since the tower was built. It is a kind of devotion, if you think about it, a form of care that says, this matters, this is worth preserving, this iron lattice, this mathematical curve, this impossible tower that was never meant to last, is worth the effort. The night is quiet now, the lights are steady, the city sleeps, and the tower stands as it has stood, as it will stand, patient and luminous against the deep blue sky. The wind moves through the lattice, a faint sound, almost musical. The iron sings, very softly, a sound that only the tower hears, a lullaby, perhaps, for a city that is drifting off to sleep. Close your eyes. Let the image of the tower fade to gold against the darkness. Let the hum of the city grow distant. Let the story settle around you like a blanket. The tower is there. The tower is always there, glowing in the dark, patient, beautiful, waiting for morning. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams. If you enjoyed this, there are more stories waiting for you.